Are any of the characters in your war books based on real people, specific real people?
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to grab this one here, if I'm allowed to.
Of course.
Well, it's my book, isn't it?
It's yours.
Sort of. I discovered that there's an extraordinary man who, again, most people have never heard of this man. It's called Walter Tull. And Walter Tull was the first black officer in the British Army. And his name should be right up there in terms of, I suppose, the way society has changed, because he was, if you like, an early pioneer of being black and accepted as being a valuable citizen in this country way, way back. Not only that, he was a formidable footballer. I mean, the man played for Arsenal, and he, again, had to suffer, as a lot of these people did then, the most dreadful racial abuse as when he trotted out onto a field. And he shrugged it off, never complained about it, he just went on doing it, and he became much, much loved. Shall I read you a tiny bit of it? Do you mind?
Please.
Is that all right?
Do.
This is about this little boy. He was in an orphanage, and this is how he became a footballer, and eventually we get to know him a bit better. But through this, by the time Leroy's voice broke, he was out of the orphanage, apprenticed to a carpenter and playing football for his local side. Whenever he played, wherever he played, he was still the Wizard. The name stuck with him and stayed. Home supporters loved him. But when they played away, the crowd would sometimes call him all manner of horrible things from the terraces. But that only made him play all the harder to win, to make them eat their words. He had found his way of getting back at them. He had an offer to play for the Arsenal the week before the war broke out, in August 1914 it was. In the newspapers they called him the Wonder Wizard of Walworth. He'd soon be playing not just for the Arsenal, but for England too, they wrote. He was that good. But all his footballing pals were joining up, everyone in the team. There were posters all around, everywhere you looked. Your country needs you, for king and country. Leroy was swept along on a tide of enthusiasm, patriotism and optimism, as they all were, as I was too, the whole country was. He knew he had to go where and when his country called. It was his duty. Leroy stuck with his pals, his football team. They all joined up together and went off across the channel to fight. So Leroy never played for the Arsenal, nor for England either. By the time I met him that day in the cafe in Popperinga only a few months later, 7 of the football team who joined up with him were already dead. I'm the only forward left, Leroy told me, but I can run faster than any of them. Dodge and duck and dive, you should see me. No Fritz bullet's going to catch me. You'll see. Anyway, that's a sort of introduction to him. Unfortunately, he did die. He was one of the 400,000 soldiers killed or wounded in the 16-day-long Battle of the Somme. And no one knows where he's buried. It's listed, if you go to, there's a memorial at Arras in France, and his name's up there, Walter Tull. But he was extraordinary. His grandmother had been a slave in the Caribbean, and he had a Barbadian father and an English mother who died when he was a little boy. So he was one of the very earliest black people who people realized was extraordinary. And that changes people's views. And that's wonderful. He was a pioneer in all sorts of ways. So that's why I wrote the book. It's called A Medal for Leroy. And I love the book dearly.
And he displayed great heroism in the war as well, didn't he?
Huge heroism.
The title of
well,
the book.
It was one of the reasons they had to make him an officer. He went out there as a regular soldier, but he was so brave and did so many good things that he was recommended by his company commander to be an officer. But they just wrote his name down, Walter Tull, and the name was sent back to England. I'm recommending him to be an officer. And then he turned up as an officer training course. And they looked at him and thought, oh, because they hadn't seen a black man on an officer training course before. But he was there. So then you couldn't turn him away. So he became an officer because he was so good at what he did, and it was undeniable. And that's rather wonderful.